Well, good morning once again. This is now we're going to get into the message. So, as is said, my name is Tyson Bradley, and before you ask which part of America I'm from, I'm actually from Vancouver, Canada. So don't make that mistake afterwards. I'll be very offended. But I'm joined by my wife this morning, and the way that we came to be here, not just to this church but to London, is we had a very comfortable life in Vancouver. I had a job where I worked 48 to 56 hours a week. I knew there was going to be a paycheck. I had a very comfortable church. I had no ill feelings towards my church. I had attended there for several years and really loved it. And we were quite comfortable. Life was going all right. And then I visited London in 2012 during the Olympics. And I didn't see any Olympic events because I'm from Canada and we don't know what the sun is. But it was when I was walking around London that I just felt so strongly called. I said I could see myself living here one day. And that was all I said. I went back to Canada. I prayed about it. And I felt, God was calling me to leave this very comfortable place and go to a place where I had no job, knew no one, didn't have a church, didn't have a UK bank account, a UK cell phone, anything. We arrived and we were basically homeless for 2 weeks, and we were staying from accommodation to accommodation every night. We would go to different Airbnbs, hotels, and stuff like that for 2 weeks with 5 large suitcases. Imagine trying to get onto the tube with these 5 large suitcases. It was an absolute nightmare for the first 2 weeks, but we knew that God had called us here. And as hard as it was, we had felt that God was calling us to a very uncertain place. And so sometimes we're faced with an uncertain situation where we know that we're not in control. But if we are honest, in these times, sometimes what we lack is powerful faith. And that's what we need during moments of uncertainty. We don't always abandon our will and say, "Thy will be done." We don't always just give it up to God and say, "I trust Him completely, fully, that as uncertain as this situation is, that I just trust Him." See, many people prayed the prayer. They were saved at a very young age. They prayed the sinner's prayer, became a Christian, and then just thought doing good stuff would come later. Now I'm saved and that's it. Maybe now I'll start to do good things. But saving faith is a continuation of that prayer that we prayed when we were first saved. And so, sometimes we're called the frozen chosen, that we're God's chosen people, but we're frozen and we're not going to do any good works or something like that. And so we think that praying the prayer and living faith are two separate things. And so this morning, for those of us who have been coming from Westminster Chapel, and that's where I'm from, is we've been going through Hebrews 11, and so that's why I read Hebrews 11, 8 to 12. And I'll read it again so that it's fresh in our mind. But this chapter is really about how to live out that saving faith. And so this morning we're looking at the saving faith of Abraham and Sarah, and we're looking at the idea that powerful faith trusts in the one who has ultimate power. So with that, there's 3 things. There's a promise of God, there's trust in uncertainty, and then there's a response. So there's a promise, trust, and response. So I'm going to reread Hebrews 11, 8 to 12 for us. And it says this: "By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age of since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore." So what do we see first? We see there's a promise. There's a promise of God. Throughout the Old Testament, God promises many things. I was in Bible college back in Canada, and I had to take an Old Testament class. And my Old Testament professor always used to say, how many of God's promises fail? And we always had to say, none of God's promises fail. And so we see there's all throughout the Old Testament, God promises many things, and none of them fail. So what does God promise to Abraham and Sarah? Because we kind of hint at it here in Hebrews 11, but I want to look at the original. So it's in Genesis 12, 1 to 4, and it says this. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Now in Genesis 18, 9 to 15, it continues, to, and this is the other part of the story. They said to him, where is Sarah your wife? And he said, she's in the tent. The Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? And the Lord said to Abram, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. It almost sounds like a bit of a schooled argument at the end there. Who laughed, right? Who was laughing? Oh, no, I didn't laugh. No, I know you laughed, right? That was a bit what's kind of happening with Sarah and the Lord there. But think about this. I know it's hard to do this in London, but think of the stars in the sky, right? There's so many city lights, we hardly ever see the stars in the sky. But if you were to go out, maybe to somewhere where you could see all the stars of the sky, or think about the grains of sand on a beach. Now, there's not many beaches in London, as I'm sure you're aware. But if I was to say, go count all the raindrops that are falling in London this week, and I said, now report back to me and tell me how many stars you counted. Tell me how many grains of sand you counted. How long do you think you'd be there trying to count all these grains of sand and all these stars in the sky? What God is saying is that he's promising an almost uncountable amount of people would be descendants of Abraham and Sarah. And it starts small, doesn't it? It starts with just, Abraham and Sarah, then it goes to Isaac, and then Jacob, and it just continues from there. It's just one person at a time. And it grows almost like a tiny mustard seed. And the mustard seed is the tiniest of all seeds, but it grows into this huge, magnificent mustard tree. And that's a bit what is happening here. See, sometimes God promises things which seem impossible, and we would laugh, just like Sarah. And later, her unfaithful laughter turns to laughter of joy. And so there are certain promises that we have as Christians today. God promises us certain things. So God promises, I will be with you always. And he promises, I will give you strength. And he promises not to abandon you. He promises that if you're saved by faith, you're really saved by faith. And he promises that he can do great things. But he also promises that there would be trials and persecutions and sufferings. And those are the ones that we don't want to say, oh, God promised me I'm going to suffer this week. That's one of the promises that we wouldn't want to hold on to. But you see, the thing is, powerful faith trusts in the one who has ultimate power. So first, there's a promise, right? There's a promise of God. But then there's trust. There's trust in uncertainty. Think about the uncertain circumstances that faced Abraham and Sarah. Very little information was told to them as to what they were to actually do. It was very uncertain. Think of the uncertainty that faces many Christians today. There are some Christians who, I was reading recently from Nigeria, who were saying, you know what, we might not get to go to church tomorrow. But if we do, and if tomorrow is our last day going to church, we will make sure that we praise God. because we never know when it's going to be our last Sunday at church. Because they're always facing the uncertainty of being killed for their faith. And it's a very sad thing. And I think many of us probably were quite certain that we would show up to church this morning. Imagine not having that certainty. There's a lot of uncertainty facing Christians elsewhere in the world today. And we are promised that there will be trials and there will be persecutions in this life. And there are 3 promises in these verses to Abraham and Sarah. We'll just quickly look at those. First, Abraham trusts God and leaves his homeland for an unknown promise, a place of promise. So think about it. In Genesis 12:1, now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you." Do you notice God didn't actually tell him where to go? God just said, "Go." It was just Abraham, just go. And he didn't say where. Why? Why did God not tell him where to go? Because this was to build a powerful faith in Abraham, which would be able to carry him wherever he went and whatever he did and whatever he was called to do. This was a powerful faith. God was not telling him where to go. There was uncertainty. It was just, Abraham, go. I'm just calling you to go. Will you obey? Will you trust? Secondly, Abraham trusts God and lives in tents instead of building a city with permanent foundations. So if you've ever been camping and you've been in a tent and it's been raining, as it often does in this country, and in mine as well. Lord knows I've been camping in the rain, and I've actually been in a tent that was leaking during a rainstorm. It's not fun. It's not comfortable at all, really, is it? And so it's just not a comfortable place to be so obviously what is happening there is God is calling him out of his comfort zone. And God might be calling us out of our comfort zone as well. Sometimes God calls us out of a comfortable situation into a risky one, into one where we don't know what's going to happen. And Abraham did it because he knew that his faith was not, this earth is not his home. He was longing for the city whose foundation, whose builder is God. He wasn't longing for having a nice tent here and now. He said, you know what, life is short, but eternity is long. And so that's the city I'm really longing for. I'm not longing for, the city built by Christopher Wren, who's the guy who rebuilt much of London after it burned down in 1666. He built St. Paul's Cathedral. He wasn't longing for Christopher Wren's city. He was longing for the designer and builder who is God. Third, Sarah trusts God and conceives when she is barren and past the age of childbearing. We know that she's not really the best example of faith. I mean, if we're talking about faith, which is what we are talking about, powerful faith, she's not really the best example, because what did she do? She laughed. God said, "I'm going to give you a child." And she said, "Ha, really? I don't think so. I'm old. Clearly, you don't know that." But certainly God knew, and he said, "Nothing's impossible for me." And no matter how bleak our circumstances, no matter how uncertain our circumstances, no matter how impossible our circumstances, nothing's too impossible for God, is it? So this is not, when we're talking about uncertainty, we're not talking about an uncertainty of salvation. They weren't saying, "I don't know if I'm saved. I don't know if I'm going to wake up and be a Christian tomorrow." That's not what they were saying. They were quite certain that they were really saved, that they were really God's chosen people. So we, as Christians, we can be very uncertain about our circumstances. So we might not say, I don't know if I'm going to wake up as an atheist tomorrow morning. We can have certainty that we will wake up as Christians, but we don't know if we'll wake up at all. That's where the uncertainty lies. So you see the difference there, is that we can know we are really saved. God has promised, if you are saved by faith, you are really saved. But what that means and how that plays out, if you're going to live to see another day, it would be only by his grace, and we don't have that certainty. So don't you see how faith in the gospel is so counter to just London culture? Don't you see how it's so different? Think about it. Think about, much of the UK has abandoned God. It's quite obvious. We know that this is happening. Not all churches are as full as this one. And much of them have only no one to trust other than themselves. And this is a tough thing. I think of, when economic uncertainty, when the financial crisis kind of hits, What do all the bankers do? They've trusted in themselves. They've trusted in their job. And then now there's an uncertainty. There's a crisis in what the very thing that they had placed their faith in. And so there's stories of a number of them committing suicide because the thing that they had put their faith in had failed them. And so this is an example of having very weak faith because they're putting their faith in the wrong thing. God is the object of our trust in uncertain times. And he's sovereign. He can't be shaken. No matter how much, things may seem like, financial uncertainty, job uncertainty, living uncertainty, God is still in control. We're not. He's in control of our situation. And Abraham and Sarah had a powerful faith during uncertain times because they had someone to trust in other than themselves. You see that? They weren't saying, well, I'm just going to, do it all myself. I'm going to be my own savior. I'm going to put all my trust in myself to make sure that I get out of the land doing whatever I want to do. It wasn't like that. They said, no matter how uncertain it is, my object of trust is not in me, it's in God. Because powerful faith trusts in the one who has ultimate power. So we see that there's a promise. We see that there's a promise of God. We see that there's trust in uncertainty. And the last bit is that there's a response. And if you'll notice, in all three of these promises, there was a response from Abraham and Sarah. And so powerful faith, it is an inner response and an outer response to God's promises. Some of you have put your faith in the wrong promises. So when society promises you, trust in yourself. Just, if things are going wrong in your life, then all you need is self-help. The biggest section in a bookstore is going to be self-help, and the religion section is going to be very small. Because we think we can just put all our trust in ourselves. If your situation's bad, you pull yourself out of it. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, as they say in North America. Or, beauty. And you let society tell you what's beautiful. And you've put your faith in what society says, how you should act, what you should live, who you should talk to, even what your social standing is. Are you lower class, upper middle class? What are you? That's what society has defined you of, and you've put your faith in the wrong promise. So we don't want a weak or blind faith anymore. We long to have a powerful faith, like Abraham and Sarah had. And I think that we can all agree that Abraham and Sarah had a very powerful faith, because that when they responded, they did exactly what God had called them to do. But don't you know that you'll never have a powerful faith until you put your ultimate hope and trust and faith in Jesus himself? Now, what do I mean by that? What do I even mean by Jesus in this situation? Think of this. Think of the King Jesus, who is he's from the city, whose designer and builder is God. And he went into the void. He went into the foreign land, not knowing where he was going. In verse 8, he was born in impossible circumstances. He was born to a young virgin teenager named Mary. And when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before he died, by crucifixion, he was forced to trust the Father by saying, "Thy will be done." If there's any other way, but thy will be done. In Hebrews 11:12, it says, "Therefore from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore." Think of this, that Jesus, the true and better Abraham, did all that he could to create a new people of God. And some 2 billion Christians, there are some 2 billion Christians today. There are innumerable, it's hard to put a number on it, but they estimate about 2 billion, children of God today. And you are a part of that. You see, Jesus died in your place for your sins, to grant you eternal life, but also to grant you powerful faith. He took, the death that we deserve because of our sin, and he took that upon himself. And that was to give us powerful faith in him. And the thing is, he didn't simply stay dead. It wasn't the end of the story for him. I mean, we'll be celebrating Christmas in just a few weeks, I hope you know. But we always talk about, the birth of Jesus, right? But what happened is there was also the death of Jesus. But then it wasn't just the death of Jesus, it was also the resurrection of Jesus. And that is the real hope for us as Christians, is that he had the ultimate faith over Satan, sin, and death. He showed that by his raising himself to life 3 days later, he had power over Satan, sin, and death. You don't have the power over your circumstances. Jesus does. So many people put faith in themselves. They put faith in their government. They put faith in their job, put faith in their money, their family, their friends, to help them out of an uncertain situation. Oh, you know what? If we could just trust, as now the new labor leader, Jeremy Corbyn, and all the people saying, oh, Jeremy Corbyn, he's going to get us, out of this uncertain situation. We've put our faith in the wrong things. We've put our faith, it doesn't matter what your political leanings are, he's not Jesus, and he's not going to be able to provide the same certainty that we have in Jesus. So I wonder, where do you put your faith? What is the thing that you might say, all right, I put my faith in Jesus, of course, isn't that obvious? But think about it this way. What is the thing that you could simply not live without? If that thing was taken from you, it would render your life meaningless. Children, iPhone, computer, whatever it is, what is that thing, job, money, what is that thing that would render your life absolutely meaningless if it was taken tomorrow? That is also hindering us from having a powerful faith. It's hindering us. And the thing is, it's not just Christians who have faith. I hope you know. I mean, atheists put their faith in something as well. Atheists who believe not in God, but they put their faith in the universe. They put their faith in something other than God. So we all are faithful people, but it just is a matter of where we choose to put our faith. And if you have a powerful faith today, it will have an inner response, so you'll feel it in your heart, but it'll also have an outer response. And so when you go into your workplace or you go into your community tomorrow, it will have an outer response of this powerful faith that will come with you. And I want to read Jesus' promise to us in Matthew chapter 17, verse 20. It says this: if you have faith like a grain of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you. Do you trust in this promise? Do you believe that he is faithful who has called you to take risks for the gospel? If you just had the faith of a mustard seed, what could you do in your workplace? What could you do in your family? You might have non-Christian family members, much like I do. You might have non-Christian co-workers. What could the faith of a mustard seed do in a place like that? What could the faith of a mustard seed do in a city like this, in a part of the city like this, that this church would become so full that we would have to have multiple services because of look at just how many people are beating in to get in the doors at 11 a.m. So maybe you're discouraged that your faith is like the smallest seed. You think, I've only got the faith of a mustard seed. It's a very small seed. It's not very big. But be encouraged at how powerful this can be in your daily life. Remember that Jesus is the true and better Abraham who answered the call of God to leave the comfortable and familiar and go out into the void, not knowing where he went, to create a new people of God. See, this is who people with powerful faith put their trust in. And so we all know by now, I hope, that powerful faith trusts in the one who has ultimate power.